Hello, I'm the Nordic Investor, welcome back. I'm Swedish and I moved to Brazil over 5 years ago. And in today's video I want to talk about buying a property in Brazil. So I bought a house a few years ago, so I thought I'd share my experiences and also some tips on buying a house or an apartment. So let's begin. Okay, so before I go through the whole process of finding a property and then purchasing it, I just want to talk about a few general things. So first of all, any foreigner can buy a property in Brazil. You don't need to have a visa, you don't need to be resident here. But one thing you do need is a CPF, so this is a tax ID with Receita Federal. Receita Federal is the taxman, so the IRS or the Inland Revenue. But it's pretty easy to get that, and I'll leave a link in the description below to a website that explains everything. But once you have that CPF, you're able to buy a property in Brazil. So in terms of the property market here in Brazil, so prices of properties have gone up a lot recently over the last couple of years, which they kind of have in all over the world. And then recently now, with higher inflation and the central bank increasing interest rates, the market has cooled down a bit. And I would say now the market is more a buyer's market than a seller's market. So buyers who are purchasing property now are able to get a bigger discount. In terms of prices of property in Brazil, so obviously Brazil is a massive country and prices are very different depending on where you want to purchase the property. But for example, in the south of Brazil, where I live, you can buy a nice 2-bedroom apartment for like $70,000-$80,000. But if you want to live in the big cities, so here in the south that would be Porto Alegre in Rio Grande do Sul or Florianopolis in Santa Catarina, then you're going to have to spend a lot more. And then we're talking kind of between $100,000 and $200,000 to get a nice 2-bedroom apartment. Okay, so that's a bit of general information about the property market here in Brazil. So let's now go through the whole process of searching and buying a property in Brazil. Okay, so obviously the first stage is you want to find where you want to live in Brazil, because Brazil is a massive country and the north of Brazil is very different to the south of Brazil. So definitely recommend you coming here on holiday first, and if you can, don't just visit the tourist places like Rio de Janeiro and nice beaches in Santa Catarina or in the north of Brazil, but also visit some other areas where maybe less tourists go. So for example, for me, I think I came to Brazil 3 times before I decided to move here. So I visited Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, also the northeast, Aracaju, Salvador, and then also the south, Florianopolis, Porto Alegre, and also a bit of the countryside as well in the south. And for me it was pretty clear that I wanted to live in the south of Brazil. I didn't want to live in the big cities, Sao Paulo, Rio, because one, I'm not a city boy, but also very expensive there. And even if you were to live in the countryside away from those cities, it's still pretty expensive. And I kind of like the south because it has a bit more of a European vibe. It's got lots of immigrants from Germany and Italy. Also much cheaper to live here in the south. And also it's got distinct seasons as well. It gets a bit cold here in winter, very hot in summer. And for a European, I kind of like the fact that you've got different seasons. Now it's very difficult to really get a feel for a place just visiting it on holiday, so what I would really recommend is when you do come to Brazil, you rent a place, you don't buy a place immediately. That way you can kind of live there, really get a feel for the place, and then you're able to travel to different areas, get to know those areas better, and if you decide you really don't like the place that you chose, then you just cancel that lease rental agreement and you kind of rent a place somewhere else. And that's what we did, which allowed us to get to know the whole area, the whole state, and then really decide where we want to live and then buy a house. Okay, so once you've found that area they want to buy a property in, the second stage is searching for a property. And there are some big property websites. You've got Viva Real, you've got Zap Móveis, where loads of different estate agents advertise the properties that they're selling. And I'll leave a link to some of those websites in the description below. But don't expect all real estate agents to advertise on those websites, and don't expect the estate agents that are advertising on there to include all their properties. So it's a good starting point, but you will have to contact the estate agents individually. There are 2 ways to do that. You can obviously drive to that city or town, and visit those estate agents personally. The other way of doing it, which is also very effective, is just searching for estate agents on Google Map in that town that you're interested in. So the Portuguese word for estate agent is imobiliário. And then just finding their contact details. Nearly all of them have WhatsApp. So it's just a case of calling them or just sending a message. And then they'll send you pictures of all the properties they have on their books on WhatsApp. If you kind of want to start the search before you are in Brazil, that's an effective way. And when it comes to apartments, one thing which is very popular is to buy off-plan. So you're buying the apartment before they finish constructing it. And so if you do that, you get a bigger discount, but obviously you have to wait longer. And again, the estate agents are selling these off-plan apartments as well. And then once you've found the property that you're interested in, you go and visit it with the estate agent. And obviously you need to check the property for the usual things. But there are a couple of things that you kind of have to pay attention to more here in Brazil. So the first one is humidity. So some parts of Brazil, especially in the south, it's very, very humid. And most apartment houses, they don't have humidity control systems inside. Because I know that in some parts of America where it's very humid, so especially in the south, they have these big air conditioning ventilation systems that remove humidity from inside the house and then bring in fresh air, which has been dehumidified to make sure that the inside of the house isn't humid. But here in Brazil, that isn't normal, and none of the houses or apartments that I looked at when we were buying a property had that. So what that means is the property can get very humid inside. And the way they solve the humidity problem here in Brazil is they like to have properties which receive a lot of direct sunlight. The sunlight hits all the external walls, so that heats up all the walls, heats up the property, and reduces the humidity. So properties that have big trees or buildings close to them which block out the sunlight, these properties might have more humidity problems. So the ideal situation is that all the external walls of the property receive direct sunlight during the day. But this doesn't solve all the humidity problems, so you do have to get used to the inside of the house being more humid than probably what you want. Another important thing to check with properties in Brazil is rising damp in the walls. So in general, obviously there are exceptions, houses are built with not very good dampness protection on the walls, which means that dampness starts rising up in the walls, paint starts flaking, and you can have mold problems. So it's important to check the walls to make sure there's no rising damp. And if you're buying an apartment, if you avoid buying the apartment on the ground floor, then you shouldn't really have any problems with rising damp. The other thing you need to request is a matricular of the house, so the deed or the property register. So that kind of describes the property, how big it is, how big the land is, who owns it, if there's any financing, if there are any other claims to the property. So it's very important that you request that, you analyze that. And if you're using a lawyer, then you send that to the lawyer for them to check. And actually when we were searching for a property, we found property which we liked, but then we found out that the property didn't have a matricular, it hadn't been registered. And that's quite common actually in the towns in the countryside with lots of houses not having the deed or the register. And you can't legally buy a property which doesn't have a matricular, so then you'd have to wait for the owner to register the house, and there might be complications. So my kind of advice is, if the property is not registered properly, then just avoid it. Okay, so once you found the property that you like, the next stage is to make an offer. And the general rule is that you're able to negotiate down the price of the property. And like I said, at the moment, it's more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. You should be able to negotiate a bigger discount. And just to give you a feel about how much you're able to negotiate, so when we bought our house, which was a number of years ago, we managed to negotiate an 8% discount on the house. And obviously this all depends on a lot of factors, like where you're buying this property, how desperate the seller is to sell. I would recommend that you start negotiating with a big discount, and then hopefully you reach an agreement. And in general, if you're paying for the property 100% in cash, you should be able to secure a bigger discount than if you pay partly in cash and partly through a mortgage. Because arranging a mortgage can take a fair bit of time, and so the seller likes it if you're paying in cash, because then they can sell more quickly. Okay, and after that it's the paperwork. So a sale and purchase agreement needs to be drawn up between the buyer and the seller. Now this can be drawn up by the estate agent, or you can hire a lawyer and get a lawyer to draw it up. I think what's more common is that the estate agent draws it up, but you employ a lawyer just to check it through before you sign. And so this contract basically sets out all the parties involved, the amount you're going to pay for the property, and also if you're going to pay a down payment, a deposit, which is very common. And this usually ranges between 5 and 10%. We paid 5% a deposit. Okay, so then you sign this agreement, make this down payment deposit. So then what happens after that is the local cartorio, so the notary office or register office, they draw up the new deed for the property, and they also do lots of checks. They do checks on the buyer and the seller and also the property to make sure that none of the parties have any legal issues, any undeclared debts, there aren't any claims on the property which no one's aware of, no tax problems. And once the cartorio's done all the checks, and then usually what happens is the buyer and the seller and the estate agent, they go to the cartorio where they sign all the documents and the deed, and also the payment is made, and also taxes are paid by the buyer. In terms of making the payment, so it can be a bank transfer, or you can do a check guarantee, and that's what we did. So you just go to the bank takes the money from your bank account, and then the bank prints out a check and you hand over that to the seller. And in terms of taxes, the tax you have to pay is ITBI, which is a property transfer tax. Now this varies depending on which city you're in and what state you're in. For example, where we live here in the south, it's 3% of the purchase price. And then the buyer also has to pay for the cartorio costs, so the cost of them doing all the searches and drawing up a new deed. And for us, that was 1% of the purchase price. So for us, for example, the completion cost, so the cost of the tax, the lawyer, and the register office came to just above 4% of the purchase price. Okay, and then once you've signed the documents, made the payments, that's it. You get the keys and the property is yours. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful. And I'm going to do more videos about properties in Brazil, especially here in the south, showing property prices in various cities here in the south of Brazil to kind of give you a better feel for property prices where I live. So if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe to my channel. If you've got any questions, just leave in the commentary below. So thanks for watching, until next time.